Can you really get a good enough camera out of that for this?
You're also talking about like a and then 15 people that are already Amazon employees that will put through a couple of courses to say what are the skills we're trying to do by growing our own. But it won't suit your own Amazon headquarters that it has latest, greatest, weird stuff. Everybody's bringing their dogs. So what are all the dogs? You're going to put dogs on there? Part of the Amazon?
Really?
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Kaplan University's Rockville Learning Center for our Emerging Issues in Cybersecurity Forum. I'm Chris Moats, the president of the Maryland campuses, and it's my pleasure to have so many of you here in the room and potentially more of you watching us virtually on the Facebook live stream. Joining us today in the back of the room, and you'll have an opportunity to mix and mingle with them and get some information afterwards, are representatives from Mantech and Prism, two companies that have some positions available. And so for the students in the room and with us today, be sure and stay after to chat with those companies about cyber recruitment needs, current and upcoming, that they may have. We also have representatives from our Career Services Department at Kaplan, as well as our admissions folks available at the Kaplan table to answer any questions that you may have about our cybersecurity programs at the bachelor's and master's level, and also the over 180 additional programs offered by Kaplan University. We're joined this morning, as I said, virtually by an audience who's watching us live on Facebook, and we are broadcasting from our Kaplan University Rockville page, and a full recording of today's session will be available online after the event at facebook.com/Kaplan Rockville Learning Center /. For today's event, we're also using the hashtag Kaplan Cyber. So if you're posting any pictures or anything about today's event, please use that hashtag Kaplan Cyber. All right? We're going to get started now, and up first is our keynote, and I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. She is Stacy Halata. Stacy is the Vice President for Information Security and Privacy for Graham Holdings Company. Formerly, we know that as the Washington Post Company. Since 2003, Stacy has led the development and implementation of information security and privacy programs, including Sarbanes-Oxley, privacy law, payment card industry compliance, and other data protection efforts. Stacy has more than 20 years of experience in information technology, security, and privacy. Before joining Graham Holdings, she served as the federal government and Southeast region leader for Guardiant, now part of VeriSign, a security and privacy consulting and managed security services company. Prior to Guardiant, she worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers in technology risk services and their consulting practice. Please join me in welcoming Stacy Halati.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be asked to speak to you all today. And I want to touch on three primary topics today in the theme of the event: incident detection and response, the skills shortage and criticality of training in general, and cybersecurity in 2018 and beyond. I'm speaking to you, actually, I have almost more than 20, almost 30 years of experience, and so I'm speaking to you of kind of my lessons learned throughout my career. Prior to joining Graham Holdings, I was actually a consultant for most of my career. So I do have a lot of experience in different industry and in the government. And also working at Graham Holdings, because we're such a diverse and decentralized company, I have a lot of experience just working with different types of companies, because we have media, we have healthcare, we have Kaplan, obviously, and just, lots of different environments, lots of different threats and risks and types of data. So I'm going to be speaking to you from that kind of broad overview. So on the incident detection and response front, I have to say, so a lot of my job, working, I was used to jokingly on the Washington Post, was keeping the post out of the post. So you try as hard as you can. But unfortunately, I think we all know in the industry that there's really no magic bullet. And that really there's some practices that I find have been very helpful in my years of experience, and I wanted to share those with you. And one of those things I think that is absolutely crucial is knowing where your crown jewels are and having a good inventory. This really helps you to focus your data protection efforts and helps with just determining, focusing on incident response, looking at the monitoring events over these critical crown jewels. And when you inventory the crown jewels, it's not just looking at sensitive data, employee and customer data, but also looking at your intellectual property, which I think sometimes gets overlooked because all of these can be a target in a threat environment. I do also want to emphasize using a solid framework to build your cybersecurity efforts on, particularly the NIST cybersecurity framework, so you have a balance of the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, because all of these things really contribute to a good incident response program. Going back to the crown jewels, if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. Another thing that we really emphasize is not only inventory our crown jewels, but also reducing our footprint to the extent that we can. I think one of the things that really struck me was back in one of the big early data breaches, the TJX breach, was that I don't think that they needed, I read in one place, it was almost half of what they had. And so we really just want to make sure that we're constantly inventorying our data and looking for opportunities to reduce our footprint. It's important enough to us that that's actually one of the metrics that we report to our board. And we do this on a continuous basis and report these statistics to our board. In addition to the inventory of critical data, it's really important to inventory your critical business processes. And what I mean by that is doing something called a business impact assessment, where basically you're working with your business people and determining how much would it cost if we don't have this service running. And the reason this is so important is that when you go to speak to executives and you're trying to get funding for your information security and privacy programs, you really want to be able to quantify the business risk and not just, ask for a budget without saying, this is critical to our company because if this service isn't available, it's going to cost us $1 million an hour if it shuts down. And without that kind of hard financial data, I think it's very hard to communicate with executives. And it's really hard to put your, basically, your program into business speak. So having a good business impact assessment is absolutely critical. So inventory your crown jewels, inventory your business processes, and these things will go a long way towards having a successful information security program that includes incident detection and response. One of the other things that I want to talk about that's also critical is do the basics. These things are kind of like changing the oil in your car. It's not really fun and it's tedious, but without a good patching and vulnerability management program, you're not going to have a good incident response program. And what I mean by that is, so Graham Holdings, as I mentioned, is a quite diverse global company, and we have about 58 different locations where we process information. And so if you can imagine something like, I'm sure you all have heard of the WannaCry ransomware exploit. So if you're trying to determine if you have any lingering exposure, in the best case scenario, you've patched everything and you're ready for this type of incident. But if you wanted to see the extent of your exposure in 58 different locations, you can imagine how difficult that would be if you didn't have a good vulnerability management program. Number one, the program helps you keep on top of things, and number two, it's not possible to keep everything 100% patched, but you do want to be able to respond quickly if you have something come out like that. So having a good vulnerability management program means that you have a consistent way to measure your vulnerabilities and keep them in check, and also a consistent and quick way to basically report on what's vulnerable. And this type of thing will enable you to respond to a WannaCry type incident and basically triage in a matter of minutes versus much longer time if you don't have that consistent program. I also think, and really thinking of, I'm sure everybody here, or most of you, have been affected by the Equifax breach. And what's been reported is that was caused by an unpatched server. So that also stresses just the importance of a vulnerability management program and prioritizing things that are especially vulnerable and constantly keeping on top of those things. Part of the vulnerability management program is kind of taking the data that you've collected from your inventories and your critical business processes, and then during your triage process, prioritizing fixing those things to ensure that you don't have the type of exposure that we saw in the Equifax breach. The other thing that I really want to emphasize and that I've seen, our companies are different sizes and they have different staff. And so as you're looking at intrusion tools, as I mentioned, there's no magic bullet. There's a tremendous amount of technology out there. And I think it's really important to customize the tools that you use based on your staffing. And what I mean by that is that you don't want to buy an incredibly complex tool that you're going to run in-house and install in-house if you don't have the staffing to support that. And so we try to have a mix across our companies as far as if we have a very small staff, we want to ensure that we layer in capabilities, managed security services to assist us with the intrusion detection. And I just think that it's absolutely critical because a lot of these tools can be very complex and difficult to run, and I think that you really need to understand your culture and your staffing in order to have a success when you acquire tools. Another thing that I want to talk through is just the importance of recovery and disaster recovery. You want to make sure that you have good disaster recovery plans and that they're regularly tested. Just speaking from experience, the most successful disaster recovery that I've seen, and the most seamless really, and this isn't always possible, and this is pretty obvious, is if you have a disaster recovery site that you regularly use for production. So if you're able to flip back and forth between your production and your DR sites, because that way the sites are being continuously used, and that you don't have some of the surprises that you might have in trying to bring up a site after the fact. So I wanted to go through the skills shortage and the criticality of training in general. I'd like to stress the importance of training all employees at all levels, and that's from the board on down. training doesn't have to be formal. One thing that I've learned is that it's really engaging with different parts of the business, both, as I mentioned, at the senior leadership level, but also all throughout the business. I've learned some of the most important things from our database administrators, learning about our data and, what's normal behavior and, just talking to them and having lunch with them. I really think that, engaging in all different parts of the organization is very critical. And I'll give you a few examples. So in talking to different business areas, legal, for example, is one of my biggest allies. We have to comply with a lot of laws at Graham Holdings. And just talking to our lawyers and understanding their issues has just been such an education for me, and we really have helped to forge a relationship where we work very closely together. Marketing is another example. Just understanding our marketing campaigns, what kind of data we want to use, how it should be used, really helps me to give security advice in that area. Human resources is a critical area. We had a lot of conversations with HR, and one of the advantages to having those conversations is, and I'll give you a concrete example, when we're shifting our HR systems, we really wanted to layer in two-factor authentication in addition to password authentication to our HR system, to our new one that supported that capability. And so just having those ongoing conversations and understanding and communicating the business risk, I think is really important. Another thing that we've tried to do, in addition to data minimization, and this is really another type of data minimization, is that we've tried to look at our business processes, and this is where the conversations with the different parts of the business really go a long way, and determine, are there places where we can actually lessen the risk of our processing through, for example, not using social security numbers. And so it's forging those relationships with your business executives and understanding why we use them, how we could potentially move away from them, what the business impact would be critical. And I have to say, I had probably a 5-year-long conversation with one of our business executives, but that actually ended in us not using social security numbers eventually, and they actually deleted them on my birthday. So that was awesome. So I really think that having those conversations, that is training and education, and letting them know that you're not just a technology geek, although I can definitely be that. It's just, I'm a business person. I want to understand your concerns, and then I want to communicate mine, and getting to a place where you have common understanding. The other thing that I always try to be very careful about is not just refusing, to do something. It's an ongoing negotiation. And again, that education is really critical in just, having those conversations. I'd like to go on to really talking about training staff. This is huge. I heard a talk the other day by one of the big companies that deals with huge amount of incidents. And the CEO of this company said, 90% of the time when we go into a company, we're finding that the initial entry into the company was a phishing email. So just the basic training of your staff is critical. And having training for them on how to recognize a phishing email, having the phishing simulation training. We just kicked off a 2-year-long campaign just to continuously do this type of training, and we've had it, previously in our information security and awareness programs. It's just absolutely critical because no matter what you do, we have so many different ways to prevent, malicious emails coming in. You can't filter everything, and at the end of the day, employees are really the ones that are targeted. So I just think that that's absolutely critical. I'd also like to discuss just training staff, and this is more addressing the staff shortage issue. One of the things that we've done at Graham Holdings is that we've tried to identify if we have certain staff that are interested in information security. And I have a great example of kind of my right-hand man at Kaplan, who was really in information technology for quite some time and wanted to switch into information security. And so training him in the CISSP program and giving him that level of training and education has been absolutely wonderful. And I have someone, that I partner with who not only understands Kaplan information technology, but also now is my ally in information security. So looking for those opportunities within your staff and having champions in the different areas, I think is very important. We also find that in the web application security realm. So as we're writing our software, normally in every software developers group I found there's one person that really loves information security, which is really fortunate. So just identifying those people and giving them the resources to basically be good at that and be the champion within those groups, I think is a wonderful opportunity. So I've talked about the different departments, the employees. I'd like to talk a little bit about cybersecurity in 2018 and beyond. And so basically, when I started off early in my career, I was an ethical hacker. And instead of phishing emails, we used something called war dialing and the PC Anywhere software. I'm kind of dating myself here, if anybody uses that anymore. So that was our version of the phishing email. And then you get in, and we used to call, it's kind of M&M security, where it's hard on the outside and soft on the inside. And so I think that I'm hoping that we've learned some lessons over the years, but I think, when we see the type of things that are happening and read about the different exploits and events and the hacks in the news, I'm not sure how much we've learned. So I can't say I have very many stunning predictions. I do think we're going to see more of the same and worse. I'm quite concerned about the Equifax breach, just because almost every adult in the United States data is now compromised. I'm concerned about that, both as my third time my identity's been stolen, but also in the cache of personal data. When you think about how much Equifax knows about you, how is that going to be used then to attack you, attack others? And so that's very concerning to me. And I think that we're going to be paying the price, and seeing how that plays out. I also want to touch a little bit on kind of the convergence of information security and privacy. Because I wear both hats, I see this a lot. And there's an upcoming regulation in Europe called the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's replacing the current directive. And I think this is going to have a big impact on U.S. companies. Basically, if you're a U.S. company and you process European residents' data, you're in scope for this. I'm not sure if all U.S. companies realize this, but we've been doing business in Europe for a long time, and we've been preparing for this for a long time. And it really has a huge impact in that one of the things is the fine schedule. And we don't like to be driven by fear, but the fines are pretty hefty. So it's between 2 and 4% of your global revenue. So that means your entire company's revenue. If you're a holding company, if you have an issue in one company, it would be 4% fine of all your revenue. So that's kind of daunting. But just again, emphasizing the criticality of information security, because that's a requirement of the GDPR. The other thing too is when I see the combination of information security and privacy is, as we're doing web application development and building in information security, one of the requirements of the regulation is privacy by design and default. So I see those two areas really being married together, and information security being involved in those types of things. There's also keeping records of processing of all your data. So that goes into, if you've been championing data, basically data collection and inventory your crown jewels, you can assist. I know that our inventories have been tremendously helpful in building out the documentation that we need for the regulation, and justifying our what's called your legal basis of how you can process things. Another area is conducting data protection impact assessments on new processing activities. So I see this kind of being layered in potentially with the business impact assessments. And what this means is basically you have to look at the kind of the privacy implications of what you're doing as you roll out activities that process sensitive data. You have to look at safeguards for what's called cross-border transfer. So that's when data is transferring out of the European Union into other countries. And again, if you've been inventorying and looking at your data flows and your data repositories, this can help you look at those potential cross-border data transfers. And then also to be able to demonstrate compliance on demand. And again, a lot of the documentation and activities that we perform in information security can help with that compliance. So those are really my thoughts for today. I am always optimistic, but try to remain realistic as far as what the future landscape looks like. Again, I've been very honored to speak to you today, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Stacy. That was very informative. I couldn't type fast enough to take my notes and tweet some good thoughts out there. So you'll know of my cyber naivete, but learning a lot here this morning. I'd now like to introduce, we'll get to our panel discussion, Chris Weedleton. Chris is Kaplan's Vice President of Corporate and Community Partnerships. He will be serving as our moderator this morning, really to build a bridge between our corporate, academic, and community needs, and connecting the dots between all of those things, and helping. And one of the other things that Chris does so well is help us develop custom solutions to address some of these issues and problems. And so, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to bring our panel up.
Thank you, Chris. And while Stacy was talking, I was canceling all my credit cards. And I now have no profile online whatsoever. And at least then, everything that's already been compromised and all the money that's been drained from my accounts this week, I at least have what's left under my mattress. So we're all good there. So I do want to take the time to introduce the panel, and it's a very distinguished one. We appreciate everyone coming this morning. So I will read through that, and actually, as I read your name, if you'll come up and join me on the panel. So we'll start with Basheer Azizi. He's the president and CEO of OpSmart, a software development company. Basheer focuses on ensuring the sustained delivery of client value, business growth, and profitability, and growth of the company core skills and capabilities. Prior to OpSmart, he was heading software development for Blackboard, an education software company headquartered in Washington, D.C. Everyone's heard of them. I come from the K-12 education space, so we called them the evil empire. So, prior to Blackboard, he worked with ComSys, which is now part of the Manpower Group. He has an MBA in Technology and Project Management from University of Maryland University College. OpSmart is a brainchild of Basheer and the flagship of ITSM product OpSmart, which was developed by Basheer during his stint with Blackboard. Since none of the industry leaders were able to provide a solution for the challenges he faced managing more than 8,000 virtual machines and 10,000 servers, later Blackboard became OpSmart's first client, so it must have been a good idea. Dr. Rhonda Chacon has served over 28 years' experience in the software industry. She's held positions as software engineer, engineering manager, VP of engineering, CTO, and CSO. In 1998, Dr. Chacon pioneered the research and development division of a Silicon Valley-based software company in Ohio. The division started with her as a software engineer working out of her home in the Ohio division, employing over 85 people. She was instrumental in helping to get the company acquired in 2013. Now Dr. Chacon spends her time in academia with us at Kaplan, does consulting, and is a partner in a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm. Dr. Chacon holds a PhD in business administration with a concentration in applied computer science from North Central University, a master's in science and technology from Kent State University, and a bachelor's of science degree in computer science from Youngstown State University. Obviously, she likes to read. That wasn't written in the script. Dr. Chacon's research interests are in cybersecurity and software development. So welcome. Brian Hubbard. Brian is the director of Edwards Performance Solutions, Commercial Strategic Business Unit. As SBU director, he's responsible for all strategic commercial initiatives. Giving his 32 years in cybersecurity experience, Brian also leads development and expansion of Edwards' cybersecurity solution area. Brian is a strategic business leader with 3 decades of experience in architecting, designing, and developing solutions to address some of the nation's top security challenges. Prior to joining Edwards, he founded Evolved Cyber Solutions, a company dedicated to supporting both large and small organizations in assessing security compliance and building cyber programs based on the NIST cybersecurity framework. Prior to ECS, Brian was an account manager at G2, where he was responsible for both federal, civil, government, and commercial customer solution development and delivery. He was a primary author and led the contractor team supporting NIST in the development of the cybersecurity framework. Brian also supported Booz Allen Hamilton's Information Assurance Directorate business at the National Security Agency for 19 years as principal. Brian's industry knowledge and cybersecurity understanding making him a true asset to the Edwards leadership team. Brian holds a Master of Science in Operations Research from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, as well, and a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Purdue University. If you haven't heard, we have a little affiliation with Purdue University at Kaplan now, so we're absolutely, as I'm learning, boiler up. I think I said that the right way. I'll offend Michelle Lavelle, who's on my team, who does that boiler up all the time, so we're learning a lot. He's a certified project management professional, a certified information security manager. And last but not least, Mark Shaw. Mark is the Senior Executive Director of Cybersecurity Solutions for Mantech, has over 23 years in cybersecurity experience supporting both federal government and commercial organizations. In his current role, Mark serves as Cybersecurity Solutions Architect and Strategist for Mantech's Mission, Cyber, and Intelligence Solutions Group. He develops Mantech MCIS go-to-market strategies, including the creation of new cyber offerings and capabilities to catalyze the growth of Mantech's cyber line of business. Mark leads development of complex technical solutions to address advanced cyber threats, as well as Mantech's defensive cyber operations community of practice, a corporate-wide collaboration effort designed to bring best practices and innovations across Mantech's customer base. Prior to joining Mantech in 2005, Mark spent 5 years as a senior member of Capital One's Cyber Incident Response Team. While there, he led a network security engineering, incident response, and computer forensics efforts. Prior to that, Mark served in the United States Air Force as a team lead on the Air Force Computer Emergency Response Team. Thank you for your service. Performing network security monitoring and incident response to military installations worldwide. Mark holds a Bachelor of Science and degree in Electrical Engineering from Virginia Tech and is a Certified Information System Security Professional. I keep learning that CISSP. It's in my brain. Yeah. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to, as we begin the question and answer portion of events, I'm going to remind the panelists that our in-room and online audience is a mix of demographic of industry professionals and students. So you need to talk down to me, right? Think about those acronyms and all of the stuff that's in your brains. Our brains don't all handle it. I just got off a red eye from the West Coast, so you really need to talk down to me, okay? So as such, we really ask that you will focus kind of your answers, and we did prep them a little bit with what kind of questions we might ask that face that, and they're the big questions that actually Stacy kind of referenced. So try to keep around 2 minutes. We actually have Sarah Lynn, if you'll raise your hand, Sarah Lynn, that may actually flag you, if you're a soccer fan, the red card, we won't card you off the field or anything like that. So let's begin and kind of start with that. I mean, when we think about Equifax and everything that's going on from that standpoint, what are those latest trends in detection and response that are facing us? What's jumping out or scares you the most right now, or is just at top of mind for you right now? Who wants to jump in and take that first? Okay, Rhonda, why don't you go?
Well,
and actually, we have to pass the mic, so.
okay. Okay, so as our wonderful keynote speaker said, I think we're in a mess, and we all know that. Okay, so I think we need to pull back, and we really need to get back to our basics. And that means patching systems. Make it a priority. That means who authenticates to the systems. Let's look at authentication. Let's find out where your critical digital assets lie, those company jewels. Where are they? A lot of companies don't know where that information is to be able to secure it. So I think the trend, it's going to get worse, and what we need to do is get back to basics.
I guess I have to agree with all of that, but one of the things that when we question leading off with detection and response, I often say, well, it's like kind of like throwing up your windows right before a rainstorm's coming in and looking for your mom, right? It's like, let's focus on those basic security controls, but focus on what is it that's important to you. Is it important to protect your carpet? Close your windows. Don't worry about the rainstorm until you have put everything in place. You have a roof over your head. You have windows to close. Let's get those things structured and get that business process understood, and then focus on the remediation afterwards.
I think from an industry point of view, what you see happen whenever you have events like the headlines, like Equifax, so there's an aftershock that normally the events kind of go by, the headlines pass away, but the conversations really begin in the industry. And so you start to hear things like from clients that you have dealt with in the past, asking some questions that cost money. Things like, what's your secure software development lifecycle plan? And you start scratching your head like, what? Now I have that, an S in front of that? I mean, we all know, SDLC has been there. We followed that as a process. But now we have to enhance that, and we have to build software that's secure. So, it's bad when these things happen, but they also create the type of conversations that should have happened in the past, and I think there is that positive angle to it that we start to reassess how we build software. And kind of linking back to the topic of today's seminar is that that means a lot of new positions. So I have to go back to the drawing board, and when I look into a new life cycle in terms of software development or secure software development, there are some new positions now that are created. A QA analyst that specifically focuses on security, a software engineer that assesses code from a security angle. So many new positions that are being created as a result of these events, and those positions need to be filled, or else we're not selling software. So I think there are opportunities that are created as a result.
Yeah, I think to kind of echo what everyone else is going with that return to basics, I think DHS with what they're trying to do, Department of Homeland Security.
I got that
for the act. What they're trying to do with their continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, which is a program across the entire federal civilian government agencies, really kind of breaks down that back to basics problem in 3 areas, right? So phase 1 of the program focuses on what's on the network. All too often, I think organizations that I've been involved with, both on the private sector across federal government, couldn't give you an accurate network map of what their infrastructure looks like. So knowing what's on the network from both a hardware and software perspective, the configurations and vulnerabilities that exist in that surface is critical. Phase 2 gets to the who's on the network. Who are your privileged users on the network? Who has those privileges? What systems do they have those privileges on? And then third, what's going on the network? What are those users doing? What traffic's on the network? What's at the endpoint? So, focusing on the problem from those 3 specific, I think, silos is probably the most effective method moving forward.
Rhonda, did you have something you wanted to follow up on? I saw it just puzzled.
Well, you're in tune. You're in tune. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the secure software development lifecycle, and I just want to say I'm in complete agreement with him. And there are going to be, we need the manpower, womanpower for that. But interestingly enough, secure software development has been around forever. The defensive programming mindset, fairly new, but secure coding practices have been around since programming languages were created. Okay, so as an educator now, that has to be one of our missions, is to help teach, our students security first through the entire life cycle, from concept to the end, to maintenance. And so we're committed to doing that for you.
That's good. And one of the things that I think about as you guys were talking about those emerging trends and what's on there is also, as you talk about the education side on the West Coast recently, where Microsoft was talking about the way that they actually do testing inside the company to check and see how well have they educated their employees, and the fact that they put out, dummy tests just to say, all right, who actually is going to click on this, and they put them through training and then test to see who actually did not listen on the training and still clicked on something. And they said, they had one recently where it literally was, it's not as simple as, hey, you just won $8,000 from somebody in Africa and see who clicks on it kind of thing, but was something that actually looked very real and tied to like an employee-based program in the company. And they were proud to say that the 8,000 people that they put it out to as a test, one person clicked on it out of all of that. So it was a big pride, but then at the same time, it may only be that one person that it takes to actually break into the entire system. So very interesting to think about how we bring that back to those basics and make sure you have those protections. So the second question we were talking about is, as you were talking about the new jobs or the new positions that even be created, that now it may be something a year from now that doesn't exist right now. What are those emerging trends that you see within cybersecurity, kind of for now and moving forward? Whether it has to do with how we're educating people, or what the jobs are, or what do you feel like those big emerging trends are? Won't start with you.
So I think that probably echoes something else that Stacy had said earlier. In the good old days, it was all about the perimeter. She used the M&M example, right? So, in the 1990s through the early 2000s, the focus, if you looked at it from a product set perspective, was all perimeter-based: firewalls, network-based intrusion detection sensors, network forensics devices. Over the last 10 years, you've then, kind of moved inside, and, now EDR is, a big thing, endpoint detection and response. I think the trend of the future is, there are no boundaries. More and more organizations are giving up control of their data, moving to the cloud, using Amazon Web Services, Google Services, Microsoft Office 365. There's big pushes to allow users to bring their own devices into the network and consume the data. So I think the trend is moving to a more data-focused model, right? So it's not necessarily the systems or the network necessarily, but how do I best protect the data where that data might reside, whether that's on your specific network or outside. Moving forward, that's the most significant problem is because the data is where it's at. Equifax, if not for that data going out, there wouldn't be a problem. So that's the crown jewels, and how do we best protect that moving forward?
Again, from an industry point of view, what I hear from my peers is no CIO wants to be on the headlines. So the immediate reaction, the trend is, what I need to do as a CIO, as a CTO, and so what they're coming up with is immediate budget to focus on pen testing of their existing networks, event management, trapping, alerting on issues before they become big problems. And that's kind of the immediate trend. I think the conversations, though, are going to result into longer-term trends of building software that is more secure, building networks, data centers that have baked-in security. I think so. There are kind of two types of trends that are happening: the immediate and then the longer term that I see.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. And Mark, one of the things you mentioned, the perimeter's changed, because of the cloud and mobile. And we've known that for a long time, but we're still in this mess. Okay, so we're actually in react mode. So from a training or education point of view, you need to think differently, okay? You need to, look at the old ways, learn from those old ways, but then try to use your crystal ball, read, make sure you are in the know, but you need to think differently when you're designing those networks, or how you're going to protect that data when you've given control of your data to Amazon. So we need to think differently.
Sure. So, I guess in the, over, just to give a little historical perspective, back in the early 80s, which is where I came in, certainly part of that, was bold on at best. Security was a concept that was certainly understood, but it was, it won't happen to me kind of attitude. And then we sort of have a trend now that we're, from a technology perspective, the technology is becoming much more accessible. So, operating systems are being, have opportunity to be hardened, that sort of thing, that, it's available to the end consumer, if you will. I can do a lot more at home today than I could back in the 80s with my, IBM PC with floppy drives, and war dialing issues. But where it needs to go, and what we kind of preach at Edwards is, it's not a technology problem. Cybersecurity is not a technology problem. Cybersecurity is a business problem, and the trend needs to be towards the boardroom. So the boardrooms are starting to understand that it's a problem, and often they put it right back to technologists, right? So when you see a chief information security officer, they're often under the chief information security or chief information officer, which is probably the wrong place in an organization for a CISO. The CISO needs to be a direct CEO report or a direct board report, and it needs to be treated as a corporate risk issue, just like financial risk, just like other kind of reputation risks and other kind of risks that they have. So I think that's where we'll be seeing it going. Certainly the NIST cybersecurity framework was designed with that in mind, with the risk management as being the focal point, and industry, that was built by industry. So industry understands that that's going.
So we keep talking about a lot with needing to do training differently, and one of the key questions, and particularly in the cybersecurity field, with the number of open positions that exist, we had kind of asked each of you to kind of think about how do we address this skills shortage and how employers are addressing it. Now, I'll kind of do a little bit of a plug in from a standpoint from Kaplan, where we actually just started a new partnership with Mantech. And in that partnership, Dr. Karen Gardner, who runs there at Mantech University, we sat early on, and one of the key things was we've got tons of people that are very well credentialed in Mantech. IT programs, IT degrees from 10, 15 years, but obviously staying current, needing that many of them were looking for cybersecurity to add that credential, to add not even the degree specifically, but specific skills, CISSP, Certified Ethical Hacking, Security Plus, Network Plus. And so there's obviously the need to grow your own within your organization, but then there's all of these openings and the competition that is for the same limited pool. So from that perspective, what can we do to address that skills gap? There's numbers out there that there's 250,000 open jobs in the next 5 years, and hundreds of thousands of jobs that are sitting there right now that can't be filled. How do we attack that?
So I think from a Mantech perspective, and for those who aren't aware, Mantech is primarily a federal government services contractor. So 95% of our business deals with the federal government, and it's a pretty cutthroat business trying to staff cybersecurity type positions within the government. You have competition not just from the government agencies themselves that are trying to grow their own workforce, but across industry. There's other unique challenges. One within the federal government space, it's more prescriptive around qualifications. You're contractually required to provide people with X number of years of experience with X types of degrees and X types of certifications. You don't necessarily have the flexibility to take a flyer on an individual capability if they don't necessarily have the credentials. And then layer on top of that the complexity of also requiring a federal government clearance, which in the last 5 years have taught us anything. with the Manning and Snowden and other types of events, it's getting harder to break into that community if you're not already in there. So, I mean, we have to look at it as a multifaceted program. On one side, how do you grow your own? If we have IT professionals that have clearances within our organization, how can we get them the cybersecurity skill sets to then transition them into those harder to fill positions? And that's where partnerships with organizations like Kaplan to develop custom training programs, providing tuition assistance to encourage them to get into degree-bearing programs is definitely critical. Zach, one of our recruiters we brought today, I mean, he faces this challenge every day of trying to identify that talent that's out there and bring them in at as most cost-effective manner as possible, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the business, right? So, but definitely having that multi-track program to grow your own, to identify, to partner with universities, to get the newer talent coming up.
I think there will need to be some type of a partnership between the industry and the educators to facilitate this, to address the gap, the shortage. Very similar to what happened in the early 2000s, and I was part of that generation when there was massive need for network administrators, systems administrators. So Microsoft came up with the whole MCSE track. CompTIA came up with A+, N+, to provide fast-track training for the workforce to get into the jobs that needed to be filled, that they couldn't wait 4 years for a bachelor's degree to fill those jobs. And so I think very similar efforts need to take place to address these gaps because the need is very urgent. I mean, companies need network operations centers staffed 24/7 just to monitor the network health from a security point of view. So those are not the type of jobs, I would say, that would require a master's or bachelor's degree, but rather specialized training that I think the corporate world could provide those requirements, and then the educators provide the curriculum to train the staff needed and then fill those jobs. So it would be a coordination, I think.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that industry needs to partner with, universities. And so I agree with both of you. Now, let's look at that person who is already in the field or that person who wants to break into this field. I think, you have to commit to continuing your learning, being a lifelong learner. So, you get your degree and then you get the relevant certs and then, you do other training and you have to keep up or you're going to be left behind, so that would be some of my advice.
So, the spectrum of skill sets, in cybersecurity for cybersecurity careers is so broad. I mean, it's everything, just like in the old days of operating systems, you needed folks that were just wanting to just pump out Java code, and you need people that know how to sell it, right? And you need how to work with the board and how to get that stuff incorporated into the culture. So, I mean, we need all of that. So the spectrum, really falls to people's skill sets and where they, just like we need plumbers. We're going to always need plumbers. We're going to always need carpenters. We need folks that are going to be the day in, day out operational staff, and we need the folks that are going to be able to sell to the board level. So the broad spectrum of education is really key. Certifications help, but it's really the skill sets that go behind those certifications that are really key. So we look for, at Edwards, because we're a consulting firm, so we look for the well-rounded. We need those soft skills. We need the people that can actually walk and talk and write. Most of what happens in cybersecurity is not hands on the keyboard. Cyber is again not a technology problem. So it's a full spectrum problem. So we need to address all of those skill sets.
The soft skills piece. How do you feel like that can be filled? Because we hear that from a lot of folks too. That I've got brilliant
IT professionals, but those communication skills, that kind of stuff. Is
Yeah.
there anything you guys have found
Well,
that you recommend?
I tell you what, for me, it starts in high school. It really starts pretty on before high school, but it starts with the high school students and you know, getting folks involved in the STEM programs, but making sure that those kids that are focused on STEM are also focused on writing. You know, focused on understanding how to read and write and do all those other things, not just again slamming a keyboard. You know, to do fun techie stuff. You know, it may not be the most attractive thing for some of those students, but they have to be able to communicate, and they have to be able to provide that out to the service, even if they are an operations floor guy, and that's what they want to do. That's perfectly okay. But you need to be able to go and tell your management, express to your management in a way that your management can understand what is going on the network and how should they do something about it.
Yeah, that's really good.
Absolutely.
I have a 16-year-old son who likes to play video games, who I regularly remind, hey, there's really great cybersecurity jobs that exist out there. But he's also the same one that I have to get him to put this down to place an order at Buffalo Wild Wings and talk to a person face-to-face. So those communication skills, it does start in high school, and I think I've got a responsibility at least for one of them. So thinking about in the questions that we have, the one question I would also put to you all, and then we'll turn to the audience a little bit, what are we not talking about? Is there a question out there, or that the industry is kind of not digging into that it needs to, or that you think it needs to dig into deeper, faster? Anybody react to that?
Well, I'll go back to software development. Okay, we just don't have great software out there, but we have the ability to create great software. So we need that. But what goes along with creating that great software is to thoroughly test that software. Make sure that software meets the requirements. Make sure that that software is of quality, which includes security. You know, and have those testing teams. You know, you do not want your software tested by the developer who created it. You know, so we have to do more things right, and I would say software quality assurance is something we're not talking about. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be talked about a long time ago.
So just to add to that, I think, as our keynote speaker mentioned, I was also, my information has been compromised, a good number of times. The first time it happened was when I worked at VeriSign, which was a secure company. VeriSign is known for its security, and it was in mid-2000s. Data was lost, and so I got one of those notices that stated that I get protection for my credit history, and that was about it. And then the next time was the OMB hack that happened, a couple of years ago. Massive amount of data that was lost, and then now Equifax. So, I built tools for cloud management. I've done this for over 15 years now. When the whole cloud buzz came about, I thought it was the craziest thing that I said, people should never go to. The reality is, it happened. It's there. But what I fear is that as these breaches happen and then personal data keeps on getting compromised, people are getting desensitized to it. So at some point, I worry that people will just implicitly accept that, oh well, everybody's got our social date of birth address, who cares? It's something like that, I fear. If that happens, then what I personally do is, I leverage the benefits of cloud. I use Dropbox, but I never put files directly on Dropbox. I put it in an encrypted 100 gig file that I use as storage. I encrypt that locally on my desktop. That's my data store. I keep all my files there. And then I put it on Dropbox so that I can access it from anywhere. So I think that type of conversation should be happening, that what can we do? There are tools. Many people are doing some great work in the community, building tools, open source tools, that allow for regular PC computer users to encrypt their data. It doesn't require specialized knowledge. it's just a matter of the training, I think, for protecting personal data.
I think want to expand on something you talked about from the desensitizing folks, right? So I don't think it's just from a data breach perspective. You know, all of us have probably had multiple credit cards compromised and had to go through the problem of canceling it. You know, same thing. You know, how many times can your personal data be compromised before you tend to just kind of gloss over it, right? But from a data and privacy perspective as well, I think a lot of people are rightly concerned about the government collecting all this data about personal individuals, but they don't necessarily have those same thoughts about what's going on with, you know, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world and the amount of personal data that's being collected about your online habits, what you're doing, you know, from a privacy perspective. I think that's why you're seeing, you know, some of the reactions where Europe's a little bit ahead of the curve than we are in the U.S. about how best to hold those companies accountable when they do have a breach. Mm-hmm. So definitely, I think with the younger generation that's grown up online, that desensitization to, you know, their data, what's out there, and what that data can be used for is definitely a critical issue moving forward.
So just real quick, so the other piece of the conversation has to be read again at the board level. Something people are harping on. You know, there's companies that are getting compromised, right? So recent large shipping company got compromised with a ransomware attack, shut them down for I think it was 3 days, cost them $300 million in revenue. The question I had with that is, I wish the reporters would have dug into it. Was how much did they spend on prevention? How much did they spend on cybersecurity? What's their IT budget? Because what they were running was Windows 2003, and they got compromised, right? So why did they have that? Because they're a large organization, and it would have cost them a lot of money. Did it cost them $300 million to fix it? Probably not, right? So the conversation needs to be, and it's back to risk management. It's back to understanding the risk, understanding your value at risk, and then spending money to fix it.
Right, and I think from an educational point of view, understanding business impact analysis and return on security investment. Okay, you know, how much is my data or my intellectual property worth? How much is a security solution to protect it? Okay, we need to go through that kind of thought process. And I know, you know, not to plug Kaplan or anything, but in the graduate program, we have a class dedicated to understanding the financials so someone can go talk to that CFO, so the CTO can talk appropriately to the CFO.
If I may just add to that, I'm normally one of those guys that have to come up with the money for these things. And so it's not an easy decision. You know, a mentor of mine long ago told me that you can insure yourself to death. You know, and so it's always a balancing act. You know, I think the more of these events that happen, it force companies to invest more. But you know, it's not as simple, straightforward as it is. But it's good that the conversation is happening.
So do we have any questions from the audience?
We do. We've actually received a few. We've had a couple comments as well. There have been 2 comments that came through just saying thank you for having 2 women panelists and speakers today. So thank you, Dr. Chacon and Stacy, for being with us this morning. And we're getting a couple virtual high fives and hashtag girl powers online right now because of you. So thank you for that. There's several questions. I'll just start with one, and then maybe we can kind of mix it back up with the audience. But the first, how do you feel about becoming good hackers, so to speak, for the greater good? Basically using your powers for good instead of evil.
Anyway.
First of all, I don't even like the word hacker because it has a negative connotation. So these ethical hackers are really just trying to test the environment, see where the vulnerabilities are, report those vulnerabilities, so that they will get fixed. So I think ethical hacking is great, and but I don't like the word hacking.
Well, every organization needs to understand their vulnerability environment, right? So what they're living in and what's happening to them. And it's going to change over time, right? Because the vulnerabilities emerge, vulnerabilities get patched, whether your patching program is up to snuff or not. So the ethical hacking piece, which I agree, I don't like. Hacking is a good old term that meant just slinging some good software. Doing good penetration testing, having a company coming in and doing independent penetration analysis and vulnerability analysis is important for corporations to understand. So having those skill sets is important as well.
Yes, please. Basheer and Mark, by the way, Basheer and Mark didn't want to be the good guys. They resisted that one. So.
Well, one thing I just want to make clear, when I said I was a hacker, I hope I put ethical in front of that, because I was actually paid, that was a job. I worked for Price Waterhouse.
You did.
Okay. But I do think, that is a term, that's come out. But I also just want to echo, just as the chief security officer of a company, that it really is important to have, whatever you call it, just to have those kind of real-life tests to make sure that your controls are operating. So I do think it's a critical component of an information security program.
You did say
You're a good guy, yeah.
One more from me.
Yeah.
You have to project this out.
Okay.
They touched on this quite a bit, but if you could just repeat it and have them answer briefly, what's the easiest thing people can do to protect their home computers from being hacked?
So what's the easiest you can do to protect your home computers?
Disconnect from the internet. No, I think at home, we really need to take a look at ourselves and say, do we really need to have that app? Do we really need to buy everything from Amazon? Could we maybe step back and get in our car and go drive to Target and maybe use cash? I think we really need to, again, it's back to basics. Don't trust your technology. That's what I would say right now. Do not trust it, and convince yourself to trust it at home, your home network.
I think a practical advice that I can answer to that is don't log in as an administrator. Whenever you buy a computer, the default login is an administrator, and that's what 90% of people, I would estimate, use. So when you're logged in as an administrator, anything from the internet can just install itself. There is an implied permission. But if you can easily create a limited account, Windows allows this very easily. Log in as that account and then do everything else. And whenever you do need administrative rights, it will ask you, do you want to install this? Type in your password. So that's a very practical thing that if people could do, a lot of the issues could be prevented.
So Chris, when your son buys that, that camera or, that smart camera in the house to put in his bedroom to watch you come past the door, change those defaults. Make sure that every computing system device, go in and change your firewall's defaults. Go in and change that camera's defaults, that smart thermostat, your Amazon Echo, all these things. Otherwise, really, if you don't know how to do that, get someone to help you do that. If not, consider not having an Amazon Echo or that smart TV.
I like the part where you said when my son buys that. I don't remember that part at all. So, other questions from the audience? Anybody got anything specific?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
I am one of those people who are desensitized to the news. What does this Equifax breach mean to the average individual?
Okay, so for those listening at home, the question was, he said he's kind of desensitized to what's going on. What does the Equifax breach mean to him?
It could have any number of unforeseen circumstances, right? So, everything in our economic environment runs off of, you know, name, birth date, social security number. There's very limited amounts of information that anyone needs to get an account in your name. So, you know, be vigilant. You know, if you have to, you know, go a little bit overboard and monitor yourself, you know, there's the credit monitoring, but, you know, to look for those types of activities, but it also makes things easier, like IRS fraud. You know, people with your name and social security number can file a tax refund return in your name. And, you know, some types of fraud like that are very difficult to detect proactively, and it's not until long after the fact that you find out things like that occur. So, you know, once again, I think it's the personal responsibility to be vigilant and do what you can that's within your control to, you know, monitor your own information to kind of avoid those consequences long term.
Once a year, you know, you can get your credit report free. Also, if you do you watch your FICO score?
Yeah, I do all, I do
Okay.
typical things, so when I hear about this Equifax.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing is with Equifax, OPM breach, all of that stuff, we may not know what's going to happen with that our information until, you know, years into the future. So the best we can do is don't trust anyone but yourself, and go and watch your credit and be, you know, be on that. And when you see anything that looks like it's probably not right, then start digging in.
I think there's, so over the last decades, there's been, you know, established professionals who steal identity and use private information to do many, many things. Immediately, you know, that's one of the things that used to come to my mind is what can people do if they know my social or date of birth. But the fact is, you know, as being an open society, we have a lot of public data out there, whether it's our home deeds, it's our mortgage information, all of this is out there. So when people get your private information like social and your date of birth, they can correlate that now with your deed that is registered in the state and available, searchable on the internet. They can correlate that with your mortgage information, with bank information, especially with this Equifax. Now they have the whole picture. What they can do is they can act as you, they can transfer potentially. I wouldn't be surprised if they transferred property ownership, assigning your house on your behalf over to somebody else without you knowing it until you go to sell your house. You realize your deed doesn't exist anymore. So things like that, absolutely, absolutely. Because think about it, you know, if you've gone through a sale of a property, it's not a very complex process. I mean, so you sign over your deed, and sometimes at the courthouse they don't even ask for your ID. So all of that info, once it's put together, it can be damaging.
So I'll end with this one for each of you. So from Kaplan's standpoint, when we built our cybersecurity program, one of the things that we did, and this is what Kaplan does as a university, is sat with industry leaders to say, what do you need? What needs to be in the program? So as Rhonda kind of referenced it, we don't have a program where you have to finish the entire degree and then you go for your search. You can actually get a lot of those certifications that you've heard this team say they need on the way to your degree. So I put that back to you all as far as for students that are here. I've met several that are interested in getting into the space or are working currently, are students online. What would you recommend that they really make sure they do as they're headed into the industry? What are you looking for? What do you want to make sure that they're doing or building into their resume as a cybersecurity aspiring professional to make sure that they're ready and that they're coming into the industry to be successful?
So I think one of the biggest problems is, you know, for those especially trying to get into the field is, you know, it's not just the degree or the certification, but the hands-on experience aspect that's probably the most limiting factor. You know, I think folks can spend all the money on the degrees and the certifications without putting yourself out there, getting involved, trying to find ways to get hands-on experience kind of in parallel to that formal education, getting involved with community groups, local information security groups, getting involved in volunteer organizations. There's a lot of cyber defense clubs forming now, competition type clubs that, help drive getting hands-on experience. That coupled with, the networking types of opportunities that those provide, is probably the best thing I can do. I can see folks doing from a, lowering that barrier of entry from a hands-on experience perspective.
I would say staying on the edge in terms of what's happening in the industry, learning, reading up. There are a lot of people that share best practices online. I mean, we have established frameworks so that it can be rather complex, but there are lots of good best practices out there. Learning those and knowing how to apply those hands-on, learning about all the tools that are available in the industry, many tools out there that can help, and really staying on the edge is a good advice.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I said it before. If you're going to come into this field, be prepared to be a lifelong learner. And, the hands-on experience absolutely is critical. So try some things. Everything is at your fingertips now. You don't need to go out and buy a computer. You can go to Amazon Web Services or Google or Microsoft and get a 30-day trial, and you can install Linux based distro. You can install Windows. You can install a database. That's hands-on experience. Track it all. Then make sure you report that on your resume.
That's a great point, and so I'll give an unsolicited plug to a company, and I have no affiliation with them, but Sophos, SOPHOS. You can download not only their antivirus software for your personal use, but you can also download their unified threat management software and load it up on a spare machine you have laying around your house. It's fun to play with. I've done that. I had some spare time about 6 months ago and did that. But the other piece is, look for, as you're going through your undergrad programs, you're going through your master's programs or whatever you're in, look for internships. Avail yourself to those opportunities and try to get that kind of practical experience through those kind of programs as well.
One additional I thought about as you pass it back down, what about our military? We've got actually 30% of our student population are military. Anything they should be focused on, because obviously they're always looking for what's that transition to get into cybersecurity. Any specific advice you'd give for our military men and women?
I think at least for the military folks that are somewhat tangentially tied into the cyber realm already, I think they're in a very good position, as long as they're following through and getting some of those other check boxes that we need from a federal services perspective, like the formal degree programs. But a lot of those folks, they're coming out, they have a lot of really good soft skill training. I think that lends itself to industry, just from the nature of what they've gone through from their military training experiences, dealing with people, dealing with conflict and other things. A lot of them come with the strong clearances and others. What I would say is, for the military folks, having been a transitioning military person many decades ago, take advantage of the benefits you have from an education perspective, transitioning out of the military, to be able to continue pursuing the formal degree aspects, the formal knowledge. A lot of the military folks, have those good hands-on skills. Like I said, they're lacking on the formal education side if they haven't proactively pursued that in their time in. So,
Anybody?
I can't speak to military, but you made me think about something. Work ethic and your attitude matters too, okay? So go ahead and get all those hands-on skills and learn all that stuff. That's great, you must do that, but you also, to really succeed, you have to have the right attitude and the right work ethic.
So for military folks and actually anybody that's looking for to change sort of a career changer that's going towards cybersecurity, there are people in your existing companies, people in your existing units that are doing this for a living, that are working on this, on cybersecurity. Go seek them out, talk to them, find out how they did it, and get some good mentoring advice. And always seek out mentors throughout your entire career, but certainly as you're changing careers.
I think that there are some, soft skills and also formal procedures that in the past I've seen, the military members bring into the workforce that I've worked with in terms of incident response and managing an outage, a severe outage that needs a quick response, getting everyone together, having an action plan together, documenting. So there are some, I've seen some impressive skills that can come over to the industry side that can be of benefits. Obviously, clearance, having a clearance or being able to acquire one, it's a great advantage as well.
Excellent, thank you very much. So, one more question, actually. Yeah.
We talked about the breaches, we talked about our responsibility, we talked about corporate responsibility. This is all being transacted on the dark web. What's the stats with the dark web, and could it be controlled, or are there any initiatives to harness it or limit what people can do there?
Anybody want to take that?
Probably not the right question for the last one, Chris.
It's a little deeper than a quick ending, but
Are there any initiatives to?
I hope in one respect I hope not, because the internet is a free domain, and so the internet being a free domain, and I certainly would not advocate for any legislation to change that. But the dark web's going to exist if it does. Just like Silk Road was there, it got hacked, so they went somewhere else. It's going to happen. There's going to be an underground, and in this case, it's information. It's information that they're exchanging. It's the currency.
Well, I think there's some new concepts and discoveries that perhaps a lot of people are looking at. Blockchain being one, and the idea behind it, but I don't think you're going to realize that for years to come. But that could help with the dark web.
The only thing I can add there is I think that we have a lot of laws that need to be updated and keep up with the latest technology growth that we've had, specifically with this whole Equifax. I mean, 100 million plus people's data is going to get sold there sooner or later. And my worry is that there are laws preventing the government acquiring that information directly from you or from Equifax. But I doubt there is a law that says the government can't go into dark web and buy it. That worries me. So I hope the laws could be updated that, put some limits on that.
Thank you.
You're staying away from dark web? I still think of dark web, darkwing duck, it's basically the same thing from that standpoint for me, but that means I'm desensitized. So Heather tells me there's one more online question. I told you we're ending 2 questions ago, so this is good.
And then there was a follow-up message to make sure that we got the question, so apparently it's urgent. The question is, there are a lot of cyber careers that require a security clearance. What is the best way to go about getting a security clearance? And I'm assuming they mean like a top-level secret security.
You can buy one on the dark web now.
And I'll add that, when I did one of these panels before with somebody from the NSA, they said to soldiers coming out as well as my son, stay off the bad parts of the web, because we're going to know that when we first start investigating you. So that's one of them. But
yeah, I would say from my experience, that's a very difficult question to answer. And in fact, there's probably multiple paths in. Most of them start off with, who do you know? And it's just the reality of the world we live in with, as I said, the Mannings, the Snowdens, the breaches the government has suffered over the years, which have taken a closed community with very few paths in and closed off most of those paths. So I think there's a couple different ways. There's especially in the DC metro region, there's a lot of cleared defense contractors. There's jobs at these cleared defense contractors that don't require a clearance to get in the door. So actively targeting a company that has a large footprint supporting the federal government, maybe finding a position that today doesn't require that, but once you're in the door, opens up an opportunity for them to clear you against one of their existing programs, is probably, I don't want to say an easier path, but one of the paths of least resistance. I think there's also an opportunity, across the federal government agencies themselves, whether it's on the federal civilian side or the DoD side. There's National Guard units all over America that have a cyber focus. So, potentially looking at service through an organization like that to kind of gain entry into the, cleared defense world. Same thing with the government agencies. Intro type positions where you go into a government agency and get cleared that way. There's no easy answer and probably a lot of work and planning ahead for the individuals that want to go that path. But definitely there are potential avenues.
I think the questioner, the way if I understood it correctly is that how do you easily get the security clearance? The answer is you can't. The answer is have the skills that are in high enough demand that would facilitate an employer to get you the clearance. So it's really focus on the skills. If you're a student, don't worry about getting a security clearance. That will come. When the company wants you, bad enough, they will fast track that process. I mean, it's a process and there are things they cannot do, but then there are things that, they can do. They can pay a consultant higher fees to fast track your process. So, focus on the skills that are in high demand.
I would agree, focus on the skills that are high demand. Getting cleared costs a lot of money, but also you have those skills, behave. So let's rewind to your son, start now, and every action you take when it comes to posting things or just things you do in college they're going to go back, and so behave.
I grew up in Indiana. You have nothing to do to get in trouble. That's what I did. The government's a great place to start. For your career, if you're a new career starter, I would encourage you. I love it. When people are in for a few years in the government space and get to understand that client and understand those problems and challenges and they're all looking for the same skill sets we are out in industry. So that's a good place to start too if you really want to go down that clearance path.
Yeah, I think their latest data is they've got about 10,000 people retiring per day or becoming eligible to retire per day. So it's certainly a great place to start as well. So I want to thank very much our panelists this morning. I want to thank Stacy Halada as our keynote speaker, Basheer Azizi from OpSmart, Dr. Rhonda Chacon from Kaplan, Brian Hubbard from Edwards Performance Solutions, and Mark Shaw from Tech International. We really appreciate it. Give them a round of applause for that. I also want to thank again our exhibitors at the back of the room. If you're a student or a job seeker here, then you get to meet them. If you are online, we will absolutely, if you follow up with us, we will provide access to these companies as well. They're eager to talk to you as prospective students, as current alumni with Kaplan or outside of Kaplan. But we want to thank you. So Tech International is at the back of the room, the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland, and Prism Incorporated over here on the left-hand side, so my left. So at this time, we've actually got a small gift for our panelists and our keynote speaker today. President Motz, would you join me up front?
Thumb drives?
There is one in here.
There's a Bitcoin in each one.
How did that go?
access to the dark web.
And security clearance.
Well, let's give Chris, our great moderator, another round of applause as well. This has been a great morning, and I hope we've all learned something and walk out here a little bit more aware of what we're doing to protect our information and be secure. As a reminder, for those of you who are here and those of you who are watching, there will be a full recorded broadcast available on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Kaplan Rockville Learning Center. Remember that hashtag Kaplan Cyber when you're doing that. Thanks to Tracy Hovey for doing our broadcast and recording this morning. Let's give her a round of applause. And before you go, yes, we do have that access to the dark web on a USB for you as a gift, a party gift, your USB drive. Check out our Kaplan table on your way out, folks. Thank you so much for being here. If you want more information, check us out at kaplanmaryland.com. Take care.
Thank you.